No one in that small town ever imagined the most dangerous soul among them was hiding under rags, leaning on an old broom, mocked by folks who wouldn't last a single move against her. In Red Valley, tucked between hushed mountains and weather-beaten wooden houses, the sound of laughter rang louder than the church bell in the middle of the square. People came expecting brute strength, blood, and humiliation. But that day, the unexpected turned the town into the stage of a legend. The makeshift ring sat dead center in the plaza, dirt floor, ropes tied to wooden posts, and a crowd hungry for a show. Every eye was locked on what was about to happen. On one side, the Colossus, a mountain of a man, muscles carved like stone, scars marking old battles, tattoos screaming raw violence. He wore scraps of leather and metal like some modern gladiator, rage burning in his stare. Folks only knew him as Rufus, the northern giant, famous for mowing down challengers without breaking a sweat. He didn't fight for cash, he fought for fun. And humiliating his opponents, that was his signature move. On the other side, the janitor, an old woman, face lined with age, hands steady, her calm expression giving nothing away. Her bent frame suggested weakness, but something in her stance told a different story. Balance, control, the kind of presence that comes from never once falling. Her eyes carried no fear, no challenge, just certainty. She stepped into the ring like she was stepping into her own kitchen, calm, unhurried. A faded robe hung from her shoulders, worn down by years of use. All she carried was a straw broom, old but cared for, like it was part of her. The crowd roared with laughter. The sight was absurd. A frail old lady facing off against the most brutal fighter around. Rufus couldn't resist. "Gonna sweep my feet, Grandma," he sneered, sending the crowd into hysterics. But the old woman didn't answer. She just started sweeping. Slow, precise strokes, like she was cleaning up the arrogance people left behind. The crowd shifted uneasily. Some laughed, but others traded nervous glances. Nobody could say why, but something about her made the laughter feel hollow. Rufus stomped toward her, body moving like a tank. He stopped in front of her, raised his arms, flexing his muscles and his pride. "Take a good look, all of you," he shouted. "This is what happens when trash gets in my way." She didn't even glance at him, just kept sweeping. Then came the attack. One sudden step, his massive arms swinging down like a warhammer. The crowd braced for carnage, but saw something else entirely. At the exact moment Rufus lunged, the old woman spun with impossible lightness for her age. One clean, fluid move. The broom sliced through the air like a blade, a short, sharp strike, right to the giant's chin with a force that defied reason. The crack of impact froze the crowd. Rufus stood still for a heartbeat. Then, as if his muscles forgot their job, he collapsed. First to his knees, then like a tree falling in the woods, he hit the dirt. Out cold, humiliated, defeated. The square went silent. The same crowd that had been howling moments earlier stood frozen, wide-eyed. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. This wasn't just a victory. It was the shattering of everything they thought couldn't be broken. The old woman leaned back on her broom, pulled her hood snug over her shoulders, and left the ring the same way she came in, at peace. For her, it was just another chore. For Red Valley, it was the beginning of a new era. A whisper drifted through the stunned crowd. Who is she? But no one had an answer. The next morning, Red Valley woke up different. Conversations that used to revolve around weather, harvests, and city hall complaints were now replaced by nervous whispers and suspicious glances. The square where the showdown had taken place still carried the dust stirred by Rufus's body hitting the ground. But now, more than a fighting pit, that spot had become sacred ground, the place where the impossible had happened. At the corner diner, old men went silent whenever someone new walked in. At the barber shop, newspapers lay abandoned while barbers debated body mechanics, balance, and moves you couldn't see. Even the kids had ditched their pretend war games, now playing the broom lady. Eloise didn't show up that day, not the next one either. But her name, once unknown to most, now echoed in alleys, kitchens, and back roads. Speculation spread. Had to be a trick, right? A young man muttered at the grocery store. Caught him on a weak spot, knocked him off balance. And that spin, was that dancing or fighting? That was training, old school. But some remembered. The older folks, those who'd seen movements like that before, who'd heard the stories. Tales of a woman who decades back had been part of a covert counterintelligence unit during the Cold War, who had traveled through Asia, trained with monks, then vanished without a trace after a mission gone wrong in Eastern Europe. They whispered her code name, Grey Eagle, but those rumors were always told in hushed voices, and never for long. Red Valley might have been small, but it had ears everywhere. Meanwhile, Eloise was at her home, small, simple, tucked away among trees and silence. Inside, everything was spotless, functional, almost military. On the wooden walls hung old black and white photos of unknown faces, distant places, soldiers in uniforms of different nations. And in the back of her closet sat a rusted iron box, locked with 3 padlocks. Her days were spent sweeping the yard. Light, quiet movements like an unbreakable ritual. But that Saturday morning, something changed. A black car stopped on the dirt road, engine off. No doors opened. But Eloise knew they were there. She felt the weight of trained eyes. She recognized the kind of silence only men from her past carried. In the back seat, a gray-haired man watched her house. Dark suit, a closed dossier resting on his lap. His name was Victor Kane, and he hadn't seen Eloise since 1987, when Operation Violet Mist ended in betrayal and blood. She's still alive, he muttered, and the world's about to find out. This is going to be a problem. Back in town, other problems were brewing. Rufus the Giant had woken up in the local hospital, jaw dislocated, pride shattered. He refused to speak. But he wasn't alone. A man in a grey overcoat with a European accent sat beside his bed, studying him like a broken weapon. "You were defeated," the man said calmly, "by a woman who was never supposed to exist." Rufus tried to answer, but pain shut him down. The visitor only stood, walked to the window and added, "Red Valley has been hiding a valuable piece for far too long. Now that we know where she is, we'll finish what we started 30 years ago." Outside, the sun was shining. But in the heart of town, a shadow was spreading. What began as a spectacle had become a summons. The past, buried under decades of silence, was moving again. And Eloise, peaceful in her yard, already knew they were coming. And this time, she couldn't just sweep the problem away. By the 3rd day after the incident, Red Valley woke under a heavy sky. Clouds hung low over the mountains, like the heavens themselves sensed what was coming. The town felt smaller, restless. Folks walked the streets quietly, as if waiting for something to collapse. At the sheriff's office, Miles nursed more coffee than patience. He'd grown up in Red Valley, knew every corner, every story told at the bar, every lie that turned into truth in the right mouths. But nothing had prepared him for what he'd seen days earlier. "You've seen the footage, right?" he asked the federal agent across the desk. She nodded without looking up from her tablet. Dark blazer, hair pulled back with surgical precision. Her name was Agent Lydia Knox, straight from Langley. "We got it from multiple channels," she said. "Apparently even Eastern European groups are passing it around. The woman..." She paused, zooming in on a frozen frame of the old lady mid-move. Isn't just some janitor. We've got classified files that match her under another name. Grey Eagle? Miles guessed. She looked up. No smile, no denial. If it really is her, we're dealing with a priceless asset of American history, but also a high-risk target. Too many enemies still breathing, and worse, allies who disappeared for knowing too much. Meanwhile, in the shadows of town, others were moving too. Men with no names, no faces, who'd waited years for even a trace of her. Now they had what they wanted, a viral video and a location. At Eloise's house, all was calm, but she wasn't sleeping anymore. Rest was over. Every creak of the floorboards, every shift of the curtain, every leaf dropping in her yard was scanned with razor focus. Not paranoia, habit. On the table before her lay old maps, faded photographs, and a notebook filled with coded handwriting. In the corner, a shortwave radio hummed on a static frequency. At night, she left the lamp on, not out of fear, as bait, and it worked. At 3:17 a.m., footsteps in the woods, 3 men, controlled but not invisible, trained, yes, but not masters. Likely ex-mercenaries hired by someone who wanted no questions, just results. Eloise didn't move until they crossed her fence. Only then did she slide down the hallway, broom in hand, its tip modified with a darkened steel blade. Her breathing was steady, eyes locked. The first man never saw her coming. A sharp strike to the neck, instant blackout. The second drew a knife, but she ducked with impossible agility, spun, and disarmed him in under 2 seconds. The third tried to run. He didn't make it. By sunrise, the 3 were tied up outside the sheriff's office, each with a note pinned to their chest. They will come in waves. The town woke terrified. On local TV, the incident was reported as an attempted break-in stopped, with no details. But the people knew Eloise was no longer just the odd old broom lady. She was something else now, something that stirred fear, and fear attracts attention. In a hidden underground facility far away, Victor Kane watched the video report. 3 trained men taken down with a broom, his subordinate muttered. Victor crossed his arms, eyes locked on the footage. It wasn't the broom, it was her. It's always been her. He turned toward a wall where an old map hung. A red circle marked Red Valley. Hand-drawn lines stretched out to Moscow, Berlin, Cairo, Buenos Aires. Activate the sleeper cell, he ordered. Grey Eagle is out of hibernation. This changes everything. Meanwhile, at Red Valley High, a kid named Jeremy, the one who'd filmed the fight, was being hounded by reporters and undercover agents, desperate for the original footage. But Jeremy, clever, had already uploaded everything to an anonymous channel on a closed network. He knew something bigger was unfolding, and he wanted to dig deeper. With an old laptop in his basement, he started pulling strings. The deeper he searched, the more names surfaced. And all of them led back to her. The woman who had dropped a monster without even breaking her breath. And just like that, the conflict stopped being physical. Now it was global, strategic, historical. And Red Valley was the epicenter. Red Valley didn't sleep the way it used to. Unmarked cars lurking on back roads, strangers watching from darkened windows, and silent drones gliding over the square made folks realize something serious was brewing, though no one could quite say what. Smiles on the street had been replaced by quick glances over the shoulder. The whole town felt watched, and it was. Eloise could feel the net tightening. She knew it wouldn't just be midnight mercenaries anymore. What came next would be more methodical, cleaner, political, and maybe far more cruel. So on that grey morning, she did something she hadn't done in decades. She went to see Alvin Keller, the watchmaker. Alvin's shop was the last place anyone would expect to find a former cyber intelligence operative, but that's exactly where he'd hidden after his cover was blown 25 years earlier. Quiet, soft-spoken, with an ear tuned to both gears and lies. Alvin still kept a secret room in the back, a time capsule of old transmitters, encrypted radios, and files no one should still have. When Eloise walked in, he set aside the stopwatch he was dismantling. "Well, it's about time," he said, opening a wall safe with trembling but precise fingers. "I knew this town wouldn't hold you forever." She didn't answer, just held out her hand. He placed a small flash drive in her palm, sealed inside a metal capsule. "The Phoenix Protocol key. If this made it to you, then the clock's already run out." The drive didn't just hold files, it was a hit list. Missing operatives, double agents turned loose, active cells, unfinished missions. And at the very top, one name burned in red: Victor Kane, level 0, red target. Meanwhile, Jeremy, the teenager who had filmed Rufus's fall, was digging deeper into the dark web. He found forums where retired agents traded codes, where names like Grey Eagle, Null Order, and Project Mirror were spoken with both reverence and fear. There, he met an anonymous user called Shadow 14. Shadow 14 claimed to have fought alongside Eloise in the 80s, in missions that never made the books. She had proof: photos, flight logs, coded recordings, and a warning: if Victor learns she triggered Phoenix, he'll unleash the veil. Jeremy didn't fully understand, but he knew one thing: he had to protect her. For the first time, a kid from Red Valley was part of something bigger. But then came another problem. Rufus was gone. Taken from the hospital in the dead of night by 3 armed men, erased from the cameras as if he'd never been there. He hadn't been rescued. He'd been seized. Victor planned to reprogram him. Rufus, humiliated and broken, was now a weapon in pieces, perfect for remaking. Under psychological torture and chemical conditioning, he'd be rebuilt as part of the Veil Initiative, a program designed to turn the defeated into mindless executors. No memories, no conscience, just obedience. Eloise knew he'd return, but next time he'd be a shadow without a soul. At the same time, a new figure arrived in town. Tall, elegant, with a cane hiding a blade and a ring etched with a symbol long forgotten in the underworld of spies. His name, Theo Marchand. French, former triple agent, reported dead in 2001. And yet there he was, sipping coffee on the porch of the inn, playing tourist. But Eloise knew better. They'd been partners and rivals. And something else, something unresolved. That night he showed up at her house. Didn't knock. Just flicked on the porch light and waited. She opened the door. Silence. "I came because I know what's coming," he said, "and if you don't kill me, maybe I'll help you survive it." She didn't answer, just pulled out a chair. Within a week, Red Valley had stopped being an ordinary town and turned into a minefield of memories, espionage, and old codes waking up. Everyday people were being dragged into a war they never even knew existed. Kids played spy games in the street, unaware real agents were watching those same corners. The subplots tangled tighter. Jeremy, the curious kid, now held files that could collapse entire organizations. Alvin, the watchmaker, was out of hiding, reviving Cold War contacts where death had always been hot. Rufus, once defeated, was being rebuilt into a soulless weapon. Theo, the ambiguous ally, carried more questions than answers. And Eloise? She watched it all with the coldness of someone who'd lost too much to grow attached. But one thing was clear. They weren't in control anymore. She was, but for how long? The countdown had begun, and the world, unknowingly, was now dancing around the old woman with the broom. 3 days after Theo's reappearance, the skies over Red Valley darkened before sundown. Not rain, not clouds, something else, like the weather itself bracing for impact. Eloise woke before her internal clock. Something disturbed her. A faint sound. Paper folding inside her house. She moved fast, silently down the hall. But in the living room she found only a sheet of paper on the table. A photo, Jeremy, On his knees, tied up, a harsh light on his face. Behind him, raw concrete walls marked with a painted symbol, a veil torn in two, and below, scrawled in red, "The boy is alive. For now." Jeremy had dug too deep, his IP tracked. His talks with Shadow 14 had triggered old protocols. What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that Shadow 14 wasn't an ally. It was bait. A human-run intelligence trap, designed to flag and exploit vulnerable outsiders, and he had walked straight into it. By the time he realized, he was already in the basement of an abandoned warehouse. A masked woman, elegant, silent, lethal, interrogated him without words, only gestures. Cameras captured every tremor, every hesitation. Jeremy tried to resist, but fear gnawed at him. Not just for himself, but because he knew what he had. Copies of the Phoenix Protocol files, fragments of vanished agents, and something even more dangerous. An unpublished video, the original recording. Eloise's strike on Rufus, in slow motion, unedited, with full sound analysis and thermal readout. It was more than a fight. It was proof she wasn't just an old woman with training. She was something else, something that shouldn't exist. Back at Eloise's, Theo read the photo like a death sentence. "They've got the kid." "I saw," she said, her face paler than usual. Theo studied her. This woman who'd faced revolutions, survived betrayals, vanished off the map. Her hands were trembling. "You care about him," he said. She didn't answer. She just disappeared into the back room, returning with something wrapped in military cloth. When she pulled it open, a weapon gleamed, small, elegant, engraved with Eastern symbols and a serial number that never appeared in official records. "This wasn't meant to be used again," she muttered. "Then why now?" She looked out the window. "Because this time, they don't just want to erase me, they want to replace me." In the underground facility where Jeremy was held, Victor Kane appeared for the first time. Cold, controlled, his face aged but his eyes dangerously sharp. "You know what annoys me about young people, Jeremy?" he said, pacing slowly. "They think the world is made of heroes and villains, of right and wrong. But the truth is simpler. The world is made of those who act and those who hesitate." Jeremy tried to stay strong, but his eyes betrayed him. Victor leaned closer. "Eloise Hartley was once a perfect weapon, but perfection ages, cracks, and me." He held up a tablet with the video. "I want to build something better. No memories, no conscience. Just precision." He pressed a button. On the other side of the glass, in a sterile white room, Rufus appeared again. But something was gone. His eyes, empty. His body rigged with sensors. His movements, obedient. Victor turned to Jeremy. "And he's the one who's going to bring her to me." That night, Red Valley was too quiet. Eloise walked alone down the dirt streets, broom in hand. But it wasn't just a broom anymore. It was wrapped in near-invisible tech, sensors, carbon fiber, hidden adapters, a weapon disguised as routine. At the town square, she stopped. Above, a surveillance drone captured her face, and in a heartbeat, she lifted the broom and pointed it straight at the lens. A warning. She wouldn't hide anymore. She wouldn't run anymore. The game had flipped. The past was awake, and now she was coming for them. The town woke to the sound of rotors. 3 helicopters hovered over Red Valley. No military insignias, no government flags, just dark, unmarked birds flying low enough to rattle nerves, but not low enough to spark an official complaint. The message was clear. "We're here." On the local radio, the host tried to keep things calm. "Probably just a training exercise. Nothing confirmed," he said, his voice shaking, but nobody bought it. Not even him. Beneath the high school, Jeremy was no longer there. Eloise had gotten him out. No one knew how. No cameras caught it. No alarms were tripped. But when Victor Kane entered the cell, he found only one word written on the wall in toothpaste: incomplete. She had left it on purpose, a reminder that she could still break into his systems, not just the physical ones, but the mental ones too. For the first time in years, Victor felt something he couldn't name right away: irritation, fear, vulnerability. Eloise had taken Jeremy to the one place the world couldn't reach them, the ancient forest north of Red Valley. Trails long erased, caves once used by native tribes centuries ago, a place where GPS failed, where maps lied, and where, the old folks said, the land itself protected those who respected it. There, she began to train him, not with weapons, not with fists, with control. You don't need to be fast, Jeremy. You need to be inevitable. He didn't get it at first, but he obeyed. The routine was brutal, balancing on slick logs, reading warped maps, decoding static, answering questions in different languages. Every mistake cost him time. Every success earned him silence. Slowly, Jeremy stopped being just a curious kid. His movements sharpened, his eyes shifted. He began to notice like she did, to think like someone who knew the enemy was always close, even when unseen. Back in town, Alvin Keller got an unwelcome visitor, Victor Kane. "The last time we met, you were lying under oath in a federal courtroom, Alvin," Victor said, scanning the shop. "And you still believe truth and lies are different once the government's involved?" Alvin shot back, unflinching. Victor smiled. A smile without teeth, without warmth, mechanical, trained. "Where is she?" "More alive than you'd like," Alvin replied. Victor stepped closer. "Remember what's at stake, Alvin. That woman you're protecting could bring this entire country to its knees. All protocols are still active. Systems only she can shut down. Do you really think this ends with her sweeping the square?" Alvin met his eyes. "I don't help her because I trust her." "Then why?" "Because she doesn't lie about who she is, and you lie about everything." Victor paused, then turned toward the door. But before leaving, he said, "Get ready. The next wave won't be sent. It'll be unleashed." At the Vale Initiative headquarters, Rufus woke from another cycle of conditioning. But something was wrong. He remembered. He remembered the strike. He remembered her. He remembered the shame. And worst of all, he remembered the sound. The broom slicing through the air. It haunted him, a whisper returning in every silence, a flaw in his reprogramming, or something deeper, something human that refused to be erased. The scientists noticed. They knew he could no longer be fully controlled. But Victor didn't care. Let the rage guide him. If he wants to find her, perfect. That's all I need. Back in the forest, Eloise watched Jeremy sleep. She knew she couldn't protect him forever. Training him to survive wasn't enough. He'd need to do more, something no one expected. That night, in the stillness of the woods, she opened her last physical memory of the past, a letter written over 30 years ago by someone she had loved and lost. The words still burned. "If you ever need to vanish, go to Red Valley. There, the world hasn't learned how to lie." But now, the world was learning. And Red Valley was the last battlefield of truth. This war wouldn't be won with weapons. It would be won with memory, with legacy, with what could not be erased. And Eloise, she was the only one who knew where it was hidden. The forest taught what the modern world had forgotten: patience. Jeremy no longer asked, "When are we leaving?" or "What's going on?" Now he just watched, took notes, imitated. He was learning how to vanish without disappearing, how to walk without leaving tracks, how to listen more than he spoke. Eloise noticed the shift. Every movement, the way he held his breath before stepping, how he read the wind's direction, how he deciphered the sounds of the woods, all pointed to something bigger. He was becoming invisible to those hunting them. But time was running out. Victor had started a countdown. In 72 hours, an international strike team with above veto clearance would land in Red Valley. No flag, no insignia, no restrictions. A total sweep. Eloise, Jeremy, Alvin, Theo. Every one of them was a target, and she knew it. "You can't just be the boy who survived anymore," Eloise told him one night by the fire. Jeremy stared at her, serious. "Then what do I need to be?" "Someone no one can predict." The next day, they left the forest behind. It was time to go back. Eloise led Jeremy through routes that hadn't existed on maps for decades. Old tunnels, forgotten passages beneath the city's foundation, trails carved by Chinese workers in the 1800s, then abandoned. Every step was a memory, every turn a trap long disarmed. The city was surrounded now. Agents of the Veil Initiative were already walking among the townsfolk, disguised as tourists, businessmen, even substitute teachers. But Eloise knew the look. People trained to smile with a loaded gun in their pocket. Alvin was the first to shelter them. "Time's up," he said, bolting the workshop doors and powering up a generator he'd built back in the 90s. "They're coming hard, but I think you always knew this day would come." Eloise nodded. She was tired, but not broken. "I didn't come back to run, Alvin. I came to finish this." Theo, however, returned wounded. He'd tried to shake off a Veil operative in the hills, but got ambushed by two armed drones. He survived, barely, but stumbled into the workshop bleeding. "The time for hiding is over," he gasped. "Victor doesn't just want to destroy you. He wants to erase every trace of what you are, and now he knows how." Eloise stepped closer. For the first time, her eyes revealed something she never let slip, real fear. "He found the place?" Theo nodded. "Yes. He knows where the original is." The original. The root file of the Phoenix Protocol. Not just data, but mission footage, unedited recordings, coordinates of international vaults, and worst of all, the full list of every ghost operation carried out off the books. If Victor gained access, he could. Erase everything Eloise had built, expose hidden agents, rewrite history however he pleased. It wasn't just destruction, it was the reprogramming of truth itself. And the key was hidden in the last place Eloise had ever wanted to return to, the abandoned orphanage outside town where she'd grown up. That night, Jeremy didn't sleep. Alone in the basement of the watch shop, he was assembling a short-range transmitter, guided only by a hand-drawn schematic from Eloise. His fingers shook, but they didn't falter. Outside, voices echoed. Footsteps drew closer, but he kept going. He knew if it worked, the transmitter could call out to forgotten operatives, remnants of the old guard, people who owed Eloise their lives, scattered around the globe, shut down, sleeping. But one signal was enough. At 3:04 a.m., he finished. Pressed the button. A faint beep. Nothing else. But somewhere in Eastern Europe, a wall phone rang after 14 years of silence. In the Moroccan desert, a man raised his head as a frequency crackled through the radio. In Argentina, a woman killed every light in her house and began packing weapons. They were coming, and Jeremy had just awakened an army. At dawn, Eloise was ready. She wore an old coat scarred by past missions, carried the broom, now modified, deadlier than ever. At her side, Jeremy, Alvin, and Theo. The town still slept, but the circle was closing, and on the horizon the orphanage called to her like an old wound, demanding to be reopened. She knew she might not return. But she also knew history would not be erased without a fight. The dirt road leading to the orphanage was lined with dry trees, too quiet for the chaos that was closing in. Eloise walked in front, her steps steady. Beside her, Jeremy, no longer the curious kid who once filmed a fight. His eyes were different now, carrying the weight of what they were about to do. Behind them, Theo and Alvin checked their gear with surgical precision. A backpack full of detonators, transmitters, pulse wires, and a briefcase holding something no one touched without gloves. The Lazarus decoder, the only device capable of unlocking the original Phoenix protocol file. Up ahead, the orphanage rose like a monolith from the past. 3 stories tall, walls strangled by dead ivy, windows shattered by time, and stories trapped between the cracks. Inside, Eloise had buried something she'd sworn never to face again. But now, she had no choice. "We go in, grab the core, and get out. No heroics, no hesitation," she said firmly. Jeremy simply nodded. But they weren't alone. Victor had anticipated the move. 2 days earlier, he had planted thermal sensors around the perimeter and stationed an elite unit in the basement, commanded by Rufus, now reprogrammed. Or so they believed. What no one realized was that Rufus wasn't fully obedient anymore. Deep under the conditioning, something still burned. Hatred, identity. And it had a name, Eloise. The first entry into the orphanage was silent. The group moved through dust-choked corridors, guided by Eloise's hand-drawn notes. She knew every hollow wall, every loose floorboard, every trap she herself had planted long ago, for another kind of war. When they reached the east wing, they slipped into an old laundry room. Behind a false wall, buried in a hidden vault, they found it. A black box with the words Phoenix Core scratched across it by hand. But the moment they touched it, the sound ripped through the building. Not a gunshot, a pulse, a call. Victor had activated the hidden tracker inside the material. Now, every unit knew exactly where they were. Time was up. Within minutes, the orphanage was surrounded. Black SUVs, drones overhead, camouflaged commandos with a single order: no survivors. In the basement, Rufus waited for the signal to strike, but something inside him wavered. The memory of the blow, the sound, the shame. And a question the code couldn't erase. She beat me, but why? Upstairs, Alvin connected the core to the decoder. "It's ready. We can extract everything." But Eloise didn't show relief. "This isn't just about extracting. It's about exposing." "You're going to publish it all?" Alvin asked. She turned to Jeremy. "He is." Jeremy didn't hesitate. He knew the risk, but the world had to know. This wasn't a secret war anymore. It was the raw truth of what they had done, to her, to Rufus, to countless others. Alvin pressed the button. Lines of code rushed across the screen, entire folders unlocked, names, dates, deaths that had never officially existed, spreading into the world. Eloise stood there, a monument to resistance, and then an explosion. Part of the orphanage facade collapsed. The first assault team stormed in, and behind them, Rufus. The clash was inevitable. Eloise descended the inner stairwell, broom strapped to her back like a samurai heading to her final duel. Jeremy sprinted toward an exit route, clutching the decoder. Alvin stayed behind, arming the last of the traps. And in the central hallway, she saw him, Rufus. His eyes were dead, his body modified, but the scar on his chin was still there. The scar she had left. "This ends now," she said. But he gave no words in reply. He just charged. The final confrontation was here. The orphanage, its walls, its corridors, wasn't just witnessing a mission. It was about to witness the collision of 2 weapons, neither of whom had chosen to be created. The dust from the explosion still hung in the air. The orphanage hallways felt alive, pulsing with the sound of heavy boots, muffled shouts, torn wires sparking, and alarms blaring one after another. But within the chaos, 2 figures stood perfectly still. Eloise and Rufus stared at each other. His eyes, now a hybrid of human and machine, scanned every inch of her face, searching for weakness. But what he found was something no algorithm could compute: compassion, Not pity, not fear, but the gaze of someone who knew exactly who he was and what they had done to him. "You're not this," she said. Rufus didn't answer, but he hesitated. For half a second, it was enough. The broom slid across her back like a steel staff. In one flawless pivot, Eloise swung and struck the side of his knee, not to destroy, but to destabilize. Rufus staggered, then reacted, faster than ever before. He countered with a punch that tore chunks out of the wall, missing her by inches. Eloise rolled across the floor, spun, and used the broom's shaft to trigger a hidden lever in the floor. A section of the ceiling collapsed between them. Separated by rubble, they both caught their breath. "They hollowed you out. But they left the shame," she shouted through the noise. "And that's what's going to free you," Rufus roared, a guttural broken sound, like something inside him was tearing loose. He vaulted over the debris. The fight reignited. This time it was brutal, no hesitation, blows, dodges, impacts that shook the orphanage walls. But every move from Eloise was not rage-driven. It was precision. It was experience. She wasn't there to overpower him. She was there to wake him. "You weren't born to obey. They rebuilt you, but they forgot to erase who you were." Rufus dropped to his knees for an instant. And then something shifted. His hands trembled. His once dead eyes flickered. He looked at her with raw confusion, as if seeing himself for the first time. Memories, distorted by conditioning, broke through in fragments. He didn't know if he hated her or if he wanted her to save him. And in that moment of instability, Victor Kane activated the remote commands. In the control hub, Victor watched his agents fall, his sensors fail, and the Phoenix files uploading in real time. None of it mattered. "End her, Rufus, now," he ordered, slamming the final kill protocol. Rufus rose, walked toward Eloise, met her eyes, and whispered, "Forgive me." Then he turned, against the veiled soldiers pouring in from the rear. 3, 4, 5. Rufus fought like a monster, finally realizing who the real enemy was. But it was too late. An explosion tore into his back. An EMP charge, systems down, and him with them. Eloise ran to him, dropped to her knees, held his cold hand. "You were more human than all of them." Rufus tried to smile, and then went dark. Across the building, Jeremy watched it all through the internal cameras Alvin had set up before escaping. The upload was complete. The world now saw the truth. The Veil Initiative files, the ghost operations, the disappearances, the conditioning, the betrayals. Victor, on the other end of the feed, sat in silence. His voice, once arrogant, now only a whisper. She won. In the heart of the orphanage, Eloise stood among the ruins, broom in hand, bruised, bleeding, but alive. She walked toward the main door, where the morning light was breaking through. Outside, the people of Red Valley had gathered, and they looked at her. Not with fear, not with doubt, but with something stronger, respect. Jeremy appeared, caked in dirt, clutching the decoder in his arms. Theo and Alvin stood further back, ready to vanish into the world once more. Eloise turned to Jeremy. "It's over." "No," he said. "It's just begun." She nodded and smiled. In the days that followed, Red Valley stopped being just a forgotten dot on the map. Videos of the orphanage clash, the leaked files, the names of illegal operations, and the faces of the disappeared dominated headlines across the globe. Within 48 hours, more than 70 governments demanded investigations, public figures vanished, secret facilities were abandoned, and the word Phoenix was spoken with the kind of caution usually reserved for dangerous legends. But in Red Valley, silence reigned. The orphanage was sealed off, but no one dared tear it down. It became an unofficial monument, an involuntary shrine, the place where lies were confronted by the truth of a woman and her broom. Rufus was buried in secret. No family, no official record, But townspeople left flowers on his grave. Many didn't forgive him, but they acknowledged one thing. In the end, he chose. And that choice redeemed it all. Alvin returned to his workshop, quiet as always. But now, whenever someone asked him to fix a clock, he'd say, "Time's a strange thing. Sometimes you stop chasing it and make it stop for you." Theo disappeared before the third day. He left only a letter with 2 lines. "There's still war out there. But for now, you've won. If you ever need me, you know where not to look." Jeremy never went back to school. He was spotted on trains, buses, airports. They say he carries an old laptop and a shortwave radio. Others whisper he's building a global whistleblower archive where no secret like the ones Eloise fought against can ever be hidden again. But no one really knows. And Eloise, she stayed in the old house, in the silent yard. She swept every morning. She didn't talk much, but her eyes never stopped watching, not with fear of what might come, but with the certainty that if it came again, she'd be ready. And so would the world. No more videos, no more spotlights, no more applause, just the sound of the broom, sketching a new story on the ground, not one of glory but of truth. Years later, a young journalist came to Red Valley. She was looking for the woman from the legend, the old lady who had defeated the impossible. She knocked on the door of the crooked porch house with its faded paint. No one answered, but on the porch floor lay a handwritten note. "What you're looking for isn't here anymore, but if you know how to listen, you can still hear the broom sweeping the world." The journalist looked around. The wind blew, and for a moment she was certain someone was still cleaning up what power tried to bury, and would keep doing it, silently, always. This wasn't just a story about strength. It was about resistance, about memory, and about how even the forgotten can change the course of history with a single move. If this story touched you, share it. Comment, what would you do if you were in her place? How many secrets are still swept under history's rugs? Now it's your turn to look at the floor and decide, will you keep sweeping or will you raise the broom?